Hey, I'm Bryan Czibesz, and I'm an artist and educator, part of the Hudson Valley Pottery Tour, which is coming up on October 21st and 22nd. I started working in clay when I was an architecture student at Kent State University. I actually took my first ceramics class with Kirk Mangus, and uh, sort of where I was in architecture and Kirk's work probably couldn't have been any different, and it just unlocked some ways of working with my hands and some ways of being that have stuck with me ever since. So even though I like to work with some structure and I like to work with some kind of mechanization in my processes, which is where the 3D printing has come from, I'm really interested in how all that comes together in work that's made by hand and work that's understood like through the lens of an artist and an individual. And pottery too is a thing that I hadn't really started out in. I started out in sculpture, but has really helped to kind of solidify those ways of working in interesting end results. I mean, inspirations come from so many different places. When I think way back, I'm really interested in the structure of architecture. And I have influences from my childhood growing up. My dad is a mechanical engineer, which is part of like where I get my tinkering from, but also was always building things. And so I have that kind of like working by hand ethic as part of how I grew up. So, I mean, everything about the built environment is a source of inspiration. And recently I've really been thinking about color differently, and I've been thinking about color as a way that is about how light reflects. So I've been experimenting with spraying color on surfaces to kind of imagine where light may come from. Often it's kind of like glowing from the bottom in some of the work. Um, as a point of departure and then invention coming from that. One of the things that has changed in my process is the digital component is actually as little digital as I can stand. And so I've kind of gone back to starting with line drawings, and this is the source of most of the work. Um, and these can become 3D models, which start to get really esoteric and confusing. But I've just been experimenting with ways of kind of drawing and redrawing lines that become stacks of them that then become a form. And so my process has become really analog that then either gets redrawn or gets scanned or kind of gets resimulated in the digital part that then becomes code that goes to the machine. So that's kind of the one layer of how the gesture of a drawn line is manifest in a form. So to a greater or lesser extent, during the printing of all of this work, I am adjusting the gesture of some of the way the extrusion happens. So sometimes precision is really important, and it's really obvious in the case of this object that there are these cases where what is translated from the drawn line in the computer is further translated in the gesture of the way the extrusion comes out. So like, for example, here, I'm going to make the interior way more practical by minimizing these while letting the gesture of those loops and the extrusions on the outside kind of do whatever they want. So this is a typical way that I find myself finishing the work. Some components of it are printed, some components are altered as part of the process, and then at least one component is built by hand. So this is a slab that's pinched and then attached after the printed part gets leather hard. The clay that's extruded is the same clay that I use to form with any other method. So it allows a lot of flexibility to give the language of the hand against the language of the printer and the machine. And this is a really good example of this, sort of boundary and threshold between what's expected and then what is just kind of an occurrence. And in every case, even though these two are printed from the same file, in every case, the lines and the gestures have their own character and their own kind of distinctions, which you can see throughout the form. We really hope to see you this year at the Hudson Valley Pottery Tour, see some of this work finished, the amazing studios of the 5 other artists and our guest invited artists. It's always a perfect time to see fall foliage. The weather should be beautiful, and we really look forward to seeing you. You can check us out at Hudson Valley Pottery Tour on Instagram, where you can get a link to the website and find directions to all 6 artist studios. Hope to see you there.